Hi guys, we are back with Wishtree. This is chapters 41 to 44, and then there's only one more video after this one and we'll finish the book. I'm loving it. I hope you guys are too. Chapter 41. Morning emerged slowly, heavy with clouds. A light rain had fallen just before dawn, soothing my leaves, if not my mood. Oddly, the ground felt saturated. Spring was always muddy, of course, but this was unusual. It would make for a messy wishing day tomorrow. An early rising old gentleman with a bamboo cane approached. He paused to attach a small piece of blue paper to my lowest branch, using a bit of twine. He didn't say his wish out loud, so I couldn't tell what it was, but he had a satisfied smile as he stepped carefully through the soggy grass. No doubt I'd be seeing more wishes today. Many people came early to grab an easy-to-reach spot. This would probably be my last wishing day. How could it be that my first one, that long-ago day with Maeve, still seemed as fresh in my heart as my conversation with Stephen and Samar from the previous night? A car slowed to a crawl near the curb. I saw an arm, a blur, and then splat! Something hit my trunk. Splat, splat! 2 more times, and the car roared off with a screech of tires. Bongo was the first to report on the damage. "Raw eggs," she said. I'm assuming that didn't hurt. "Didn't feel a thing," I said. Fresh-baked bread, Harry Spiders, and Big U ventured out to inspect the situation. Big U slipped under the police tape and licked one of the yolks sliding down my trunk. She murmured, "Raw, just the way I like 'em." "Hey, Big, share the wealth," Harry Spiders snapped as she and Fresh joined her. Agnes washed from her perch. "I'd much prefer a squirming mouse pup," she said. "It's all yours, ladies." "What a nice surprise," Big U said between slurps. "This is not nice," Bongo said. "This is people at their worst." "Still," said Harry Spiders, licking her paws, "it'd be a shame to let perfectly good egg goo go to waste. One creature's nastiness is another creature's nibble." Big U gave a satisfied burp, and the animals scampered back to their homes. The door to Stephen's house opened. He walked over to me, saw the eggshells scattered like puzzle pieces, and scowled. Samar was next, a backpack slung over her shoulder and books clutched to her chest. She leapt over a muddy puddle and joined Stephen. "Jerks," he muttered, gesturing toward the egg remains. "Sorry, Samar." But Samar held up her hand. "Stephen," she said in a low voice, "last night—" Stephen nodded ever so slightly, his eyes locked on me. "Last night," he repeated, as if they were speaking in code. "The tree. The tree." "You heard what I heard?" Samar asked. "I did." Samar looked right at Stephen. "You heard the tree?" Samar gave a little nod. "So it was maybe a trick? Somebody playing a joke on us? Or maybe we were both sleepwalking at the same moment," Stephen shrugged. He nodded as if trying to convince himself. "Yeah, sleepwalking." "Have you ever sleepwalked before?" "No, but there's a first time for everything." They stood there looking at me expectantly, willing me to speak. At least that's how it felt. I stayed silent. I'd said my piece and I regretted it. "Stephen," Samar said softly, "whatever happens, we can't tell a soul about this. Deal?" "Deal. Ever. Ever." Samar sighed. "People would say we were crazy." "And they'd probably be right," said Stephen. Samar jutted her chin at me. "Tree, do you have anything to add?" I didn't say a word. Stephen and Samar shared a smile. "Figure it was worth a shot," she said. They headed off to school together. Stephen's father came out onto the porch. He was holding a cup of coffee, and he caught sight of Stephen and Samar and frowned. A moment later, Samar's mother stepped out of the blue house, her keys jangling, a briefcase over her shoulder. She followed her neighbor's gaze. That means she was seeing what the man was frowning at. Both parents watched in silence until Stephen and Samar, walking side by side, disappeared from view. Chapter 42. I didn't have much time to mull over my mistake. We had a steady stream of visitors as the hours passed. Early wishmakers came throughout the day, a little girl who wanted 20 hamsters. The grocer down the street hoping for a summer of sweet peaches, the usual. The local reporter returned. She peeked at some of the new wishes hanging from my boughs and took a photo of the broken eggshells on my trunk. Sandy and Max came to remove the police tape surrounding me. Francesca joined them. Today she had Lewis and Clark on their thin leather leashes. Each cat was wearing an embarrassingly sparkly harness. Francesca discussed the broken eggs with Sandy and Max, while Lewis and Clark wove around her legs. "I've got a tree cutter coming out later to give me an estimate," Francesca said. So you're definitely cutting it down? Sandy asked in what I liked to think was a disappointed voice. Yep, no question. You see that muck, all that water in the yard? Francesca pointed at the soggy lawn. Plumber told me this dang tree's plugging up some of the pipes. Least bit of rain and the yard turns into a giant mud puddle. Still, people are going to be sorry to see it go, Max said. He reached for Clark's leash and tried to unwrap Francesca. See, there's Lewis and Clark, the cats. Do you remember them? I know, it's a good old tree, but sentiment doesn't pay the plumber. Sandy grabbed Lewis while Francesca attempted to unknot herself from the leashes. What about the animals and birds that live in the tree? She asked. That's where I'm using the old noggin, Francesca said. Every year the opossums and owls and such vacate the premises on wishing day. Strangest thing, it's like they know what's coming. She hopped over the web of leashes. Suppose they don't like being disturbed. In any case, I'm hoping the cutters will come late tomorrow afternoon. Most of the wishing will be done by then. What will you do with all the wishes? Sandy asked. Put them in the trash when no one's looking. That's what I do every year. Whole thing's nonsense anyway. Max and Sandy looked at me sympathetically. I know. I don't have a sentimental bone in my body. Francesca paused to address the cats, who were yanking her in opposite directions. If dogs can do this, why is it such a challenge for you too? She turned her attention back to the police. But it's time. It's more than time. Well, we're going to swing by tomorrow. Keep an eye on things. No lead on the person who carved that word, but with the eggs and people just generally riled up and the cut down, Sandy shrugged. Couldn't hurt to have us keep an eye on things. Thanks, Francesca said. Not necessary, but I appreciate it. Lewis and Clark caught a glimpse of Bongo and lunged for my trunk. Whoa, you crazy felines, Francesca cried, reining them in. They hissed at Bongo. She spread her wings menacingly and let out her most ferocious caw. Lewis and Clark retreated for the safety of Francesca's arms. Once again, she was a tangled knot of leashes and cats. Sandy smiled. Maybe leave the cats home tomorrow, Francesca. 43. That afternoon, I met my executioners. Not having teeth, I've never really understood the fear people seem to have of dentists. I've overheard conversations where the words root canal and cavity were used, but in tree world, those have different meanings. After seeing the tree cutters and their equipment, I understood. When a trunk-carrying powerful chainsaws, along with something ominously called a stump grinder, shows up, well, you know you're in trouble. Mind you, an arborist is a great friend to trees. We need our limbs trimmed just the way you need to cut your fingernails and hair, although for us it's only once or twice a year, and it's called pruning. I always feel especially elegant after a good pruning, but pruning is usually done with special shears that look like giant scissors, or with a small saw on a long pole. Stump grinders are generally not part of the plan. It didn't help when 3 men wearing orange hard hats went to Francesca's door and announced they were from the Timber Terminator's tree service. I'm going to make a deposit on those silly hats, Bongo muttered. No, Bongo, I said, although the idea was tempting. Let's wait and see what's what. Maybe they're just here for some pruning. Boy, you really are an optimist. Francesca walked the men over, this time without Lewis and Clark, and they discussed costs and trimming. That's right, they talked about cutting me down, even as they enjoyed the shade from my lovely limbs. Talk about insensitive. One of the men, he introduced himself as Dave, climbed a ladder to inspect my hollows. Agnes, Harry Spiders, and Big U eyed him warily, ready to defend their babies. You've got some critters here, ma'am, he reported. Yes, I know, Francesca said, every year like clockwork. Bongo flew up to a spot near Agnes. Just one deposit, she said under her breath. That's all I'm saying. Situation like this will generally advise cutting in late fall, less likely to disturb any nests. I've got that covered, Francesca nodded, hands on hips. Animals and birds hightail it out of here every May 1st. Wishing day, you know. Dave scratched his stubby chin. Wishing day? People make wishes, put them on the tree. Animals and birds don't like all the noise. If you could do this tomorrow afternoon, the timing would be perfect. You work on Saturdays? Sure do, Dave shook his head. Wishing day, he murmured. Now I've heard of everything. Francesca nodded. She patted my trunk. Yeah, craziness. Can't believe I've put up with it as long as I have. 44. Early that evening, Francesca stopped by the blue and green houses. My houses. One with the black door, one with a brown door. One with a yellow mailbox, one with a red mailbox. She knocked on each door and she explained her plans for me. You see how they keep describing the houses, how they're sort of parallel, they're similar, they share a tree. On the outside, they're very different. They're different colors on the house on the outside. The doors are different colors. The mailboxes are different colors. But on the inside, right, they're just people. People are the same on the inside, right? Even when we look so different on the outside. So that's what we're trying to get to in the stories, that the people on the inside need to see that they are not so different. The families, it's the adults, right? That's Stephen's dad, who doesn't seem to be very kind. And Stephen and Samar have started to see that they're similar, but now we need to get the adults there. Both sets of parents said they understood. They would be sorry to see me go, but it would be a relief to see an end to wishing day, wouldn't it? And my absence would mean more sunlight in their living rooms and fewer acorns underfoot. Okay, at least let me make a deposit on the parents, Bongo grumbled. More sunlight, the nerve. How about less oxygen, people, less beauty? Thank you for defending me, Bongo, I said, but no depositing. Right? You know what that means? He can't go poop on his head. Samar and Stephen were not so understanding. They ran after Francesca as she crossed the lawn. Samar pulled on her sweater. You have to listen to us, Samar said. You can't cut down the tree. I can't? Francesca inquired. And why is that, dear? Because, Stephen said, panting. It's alive. I'm quite aware of that, Francesca said. It's a common trait of trees. She paused, peering down at the ribbon around Samar's neck. Why, I know that key, she said. I recognize the ribbon. A crow gave it to me. No kidding. Smart birds, crows. Samar slipped the ribbon over her head and handed the key to Francesca. Oh, I don't want that old thing, she said, giving it back. You can keep it. It just made me remember. It's not important. It opens a diary. My great-great-grandmother Maeve kept a journal after she moved here. So that's what it's for, Samar said. Where is it, Stephen? The journal. Oh, they missed a word there. Look at it. It says, where is it, Stephen? The journal. It should say, where is it, Stephen said, the journal. Attic, maybe. Or no, it's probably in the shed behind Samar's house. Got a lot of old family stuff stashed away in there. She gave me a wry smile. Unless it all floated away. Backyard's pretty wet right now, which, by the way, is one of the reasons it's time for this tree to say goodbye. Samar wiped away tears. You don't understand. This tree, it's almost like it's human. That's sweet, Francesca patted Samar's head. But honey, it's just a tree. She squared her shoulders. Now, I must go feed Lewis and Clark. I can hear them complaining from all the way over here, and I've got a busy day ahead of me tomorrow. As she moved to leave, Stephen stepped in front of her. Before you go, he said, his voice firm, just listen. He turned to me. Say something, he instructed. Please, tree, Samar pleaded. I kept silent. What more was there to say? Francesca looked from Stephen to Samar and back again. Children, she said, perhaps these video games you like to play have addled your brains. Talk, tree, Stephen said. Silence. I can talk. It can talk, Samar told Francesca. Real words. It told us a story about Maeve. Francesca, just for a moment, hesitated. She looked at me. You mean metaphorically, of course. The tree seemed to talk to you. The leaves whispered and so on. No, it told us about the hollow and the baby. Francesca blinked. The baby? Yes, Samar said, the abandoned baby. Again, Francesca paused. Of course, I've told that family story before. You probably heard it from a neighbor. Stephen shook his head. We heard it from the tree. Oh my, said Francesca. She waved a hand in front of her face. You're wearing me out, you two. I'm so very glad my parenting days are behind me. Listen here, you get a good night's sleep, you understand? Or maybe some counseling. As quickly as she could, Francesca made her way across the lawn, her shoes caked with mud. Francesca, Stephen called. It's just a tree, dears. Repeat after me. It's just a tree. I was wondering if we could look for that diary. She glanced over her shoulder. Maeve's journal? Be my guest, if it's not underwater by now. She held up her palms. Just no more tree craziness, do you hear? When Francesca was back in her house, Stephen and Samar looked at me accusingly. Why didn't you talk? Samar demanded. Because it was foolish. Because I wasn't supposed to. Because... Looking defeated, Stephen and Samar trudged away. They hadn't gone far when Samar paused and turned to Stephen. Something happened today, she said. People at school were being weird, talking about me, whispering, passing notes even. She narrowed her eyes. You didn't tell anyone, did you? About what happened last night? Of course not. Well, then I wonder what was going on. You're probably imagining things. I don't think so. I mean, I'm used to people talking about me, being mean, but this was different. Things aren't always what they seem. Stephen smiled sympathetically. Come on, let's go check out that shed. I watched the two of them head towards Samar's backyard. They were talking, laughing. becoming friends, perhaps. Maybe I hadn't been so foolish after all. All right, the next reading will be chapters 45 to 51, which is the end of the book.